for the duration of the webinar. So without further ado, hello and welcome. My name is Boyan Piernat, and I'm the Member Support and Services Coordinator for Hemophilia Ontario, and I'm a member of the Canadian Hemophilia Society's Blood Safety and Supply Committee. Welcome to the webinar tonight. We're so happy to have you joining us, and we're going to do our best to make this a valuable session for you. Please note, again, that the webinar is being recorded and will be able to be accessed on the Hemophilia Ontario website after our session is done tonight. So tonight's session is an informational webinar on Hemlibra, a novel subcutaneous therapy for hemophilia A. Hemlibra is currently approved in Canada for people with inhibitors, but it's not yet available for people without them. Hemophilia Ontario and the Canadian Hemophilia Society are currently engaged in an advocacy campaign to make Hemlibra available to all severe and phenotypically severe patients. And phenotypically severe just means that in a clinical setting, people who bleed like severes but may not be genetically severe. So I'm going to take you quickly through our agenda tonight. The purpose of tonight's webinar is going to be to provide you with the most up-to-date information on the science behind Hemlibra. It's presented by Dr. Lillicrap, who's a professor at the Department of Pathology and Molecular Medicine at Kingston Health Sciences Center. I'm going to be doing more in-depth bios just before people speak, but I am introducing them here as well. So we're also here to speak to you about the importance of working together to advocate for Hemlibra by putting pressure on your local representatives and provincial ministers of health. And we're going to have Craig Upshaw from CHS to speak more about that to you tonight. We're also going to have with us tonight a parent of a child with hemophilia whose life has been changed by access to Hemlibra, and he's here to tell you about the family's experience and how his son is doing. And then last on our list there is a message from the Hemophilia Ontario President, Cameron Peters, who will address you with an update on Hemophilia Ontario's advocacy efforts and plans for the future. So once all the presentations are completed, we're going to have a question period. If you take a look at the slide here, you can submit your questions through that chat box, and you should be directing it to the moderator. If you don't, it's going to end up in the general chat and everyone will be able to see it. You'll be able to pick at the bottom of your screen a selection of people. If you pick the Hemophilia Ontario moderator, you'll be able to direct those questions. Those questions are going to be pooled and then presented at the end of the webinar, and we'll be able to answer as many of those hopefully as we can. So just one last time, I'm going to reiterate to keep your video off and place yourselves on mute and while we are going through the recording. So without further ado, we have Craig Upshaw with a message from Canadian Hemophilia Society. Craig has been the chair of the Blood Safety and Supply Committee for 4 years. And in previous roles, he was the president of CHS for 7 years and has been a board member for 20. I'll now pass the screen share over to myself as I do this, and let you, Craig, take it from here. You'll have to take yourself off mute, Craig.
There we go. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thanks, Boyan, for the introduction. And so I'm filling in actually for David Page, who was supposed to be presenting today, but unfortunately David slipped on ice a little over a week ago and broke his femur and cracked his hip and is just getting out of the hospital as we speak and heading home. So I will be going through this with everybody. So I'm not going to jump into much of this because Dr. Lillicrap is going to really cover all this in significant detail to talk about Hemlibra. But obviously it's an important prophylactic treatment for hemophilia A, and you'll hear through one of the parents talking about how it's had a profound impact on his child's life. And so we're working very hard, as Boyan had indicated, to try and get approval for Hemlibra for severe hemophiliacs, and which is where I'm going to be talking about is the advocacy campaign and how you guys can all help if you already haven't. Next slide, please, Boyan. The key message really for all of this is in the next few weeks or months, the provinces and territories will decide whether or not to fund Hemlibra through the Canadian Blood Services. So we've been working very hard on responses to CADITH reviews and NS reviews in Quebec to make sure that the position of CHS is well heard with those provincial ministries to understand the importance and the significant impact that Hemlibra will have on the community. So this is where we've started the campaign. And so interestingly enough, the submission that was provided by the manufacturer was a bit restrictive in what they were submitting for to try and, I think, probably to try and get us, the access that they're wanting to for severe. But, clearly we've been pointing out that that criteria is too restrictive and it needs to be expanded to better support our members. Next slide, please. So currently Hemlibra is funded for severe hemophilia in United Kingdom, Australia, France, Germany, Ireland, and the US, and Japan, and other developed countries. So, the only two countries that are remaining are Canada and New Zealand that are lagging behind in the approval. And so we need to be making sure that the provincial ministries make this available. This is a conversation we've had for years, even with respect to, recurring RFPs and the consistent drop in pricing and the potential risk for us not getting access to innovative therapies because of the differential between costs. And so, this is one of the laggards, and obviously from a Canadian perspective, we shouldn't be falling behind the major countries of the world for care for hemophilia. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, so this is sort of a quick timeline that David threw up around what we've been doing in the background to advocate for Hemlibra access. It started in 2018 where we were pushing for inhibitors specifically. In 2019, obviously the PTs, including Quebec, funded Hemlibra for inhibitors and access started. And in June 2019, Health Canada approved Hemlibra for hemophilia without inhibitors. Then there's been technology assessments, submissions by Roche, submissions for funding by Quebec and the rest of the country. Recommendations were made in December by CADITH to CBS, which we had the opportunity to respond. CBS did prepare a document that was going to go to the PTs and the ministers for review, of which the Blood Safety and Supply Committee was able to weigh in and provide their guidance, of which we also received input from the clinical, the nurses, the hematologists, to try and really raise the awareness and make sure that what CBS was presenting was acceptable from our perspective. Next slide. And so I didn't realize that we had this many slides here. So where we stand now, and this is where I'll sort of jump to, is that we're into 2021, and we've submitted, as I said, to CBS the impact of CADITH recommendations that were a bit restrictive. We then made the decision as a Blood Safety Supply Committee, and obviously it went to the board of the Canadian Hemophilia Society, to start a letter writing campaign across the country to really start putting pressure on the provincial governments of why we think this should be funded, the importance of it, and we've done, which is where we're having this conversation now today. Next slide, please. So the CADITH recommendations to CBS and the PTs, and this is where we've really pushed in on things, is they said Hemlibra for hemophilia A patients with severe hemophilia would be available for prophylaxis. However, the subject was to pricing conditions, and that was really restrictive in the approach. And so the pricing condition that was set was that it should be matching the least costly factor VIII prophylactic product that's available in Canada. And so, you know, it doesn't make sense to do that. Obviously, it really does significantly restrict the ability of us trying to get this funded. And there is negotiations underway between Roche and CBS currently, as we're being told. Next slide. So when we sent out the message in January for the letter writing campaign to all the chapters, the support has been overwhelming. So far, we've sent 5,517 letters to the PTs across the country. And so that's phenomenal, but you know, hoping that those of you that are on this call today, if you already haven't sent something, you know, please do. If you have a bunch of family members that you can convince to log into the site, please do. It would be great to double this amount before a decision's made by the PTs. That's, I think, pretty much it. So, you know, keep following the developments on the CHS website and other chapter communications. I know that Boyan and the Hemophilia Ontario are very diligent in what they're sending out through the communiques. And so, like I said, I think the real takeaway from this is, you know, if you can convince others to continue to write, that's a really important thing to continue that pressure over the next coming weeks to the PTs. Next slide, if there is another one. Yeah. Okay. So the best case scenario that we have is the Council of Deputy Ministers and the Quebec Ministry of Health agree to fund Hemlibra this spring, and switches become gradual based on the clinics and the conversion that occurs. The worst case scenario, obviously, is that they refuse to fund basis cost versus benefit, or fund for a very limited subpopulation of hemophiliacs. And so we're left behind compared to the rest of the world. And so, you know, this is why your voices as a community can affect the health authorities' perception of the benefits of this innovative therapy and increase the chances of success. You know, clearly, you know, what you'll hear from Dr. Lillicrap and what you'll hear from a testimonial from one of the parents, you know, this is really, you know, demonstrably life-changing from a product perspective. Next slide. You know, that's it. Okay. So, you know, Boyan, do you want me to just talk about my own experience first, or do you want me to let Dr. Lillicrap talk and then I can jump in after Arnil speaks?
Craig, I'm thinking let's have you do a testimonial just because you spent this time talking about it already. So
Okay.
to create a practical example of why it's important.
Okay. So, you know, I've been lucky enough to have been enrolled in the clinical study for Hemlibra almost 3.5 years ago. And so I'm a severe hemophiliac that, you know, I've used FEBA for years, had to stop using FEBA several years ago because I ended up with a stroke from FEBA use. You know, I've got the standard issues as a aged hemophiliac of arthritis and restrictive motion in my ankles, and I've had a knee replacement. And you know, it was largely on-demand therapy that I'd had my whole life. Going on this product on Hemlibra, I have had 0 bleeds in 3.5 years. And to the point that even, you know, we were talking earlier, when I used to get up in the morning, I'd hang my ankles over the edge of the bed. And, you know, I'm sure many of you know this experience. You sort of put your feet down and sort of do a bit of rocking and get your ankles going and start to walk. And since being on Hemlibra, that has completely stopped. So clearly there was microscopic bleedings that were occurring in my ankles all the time. And that is completely ended. And so for me, without a bleed for 3 years, you know, obviously, and also having a product that's easy to carry around, you know, traveling the world with FIBA, you know, was a full backpack. And now it's a small little pouch. But, you know, for me, the benefit has been a significant amount of activity, you know, being able to walk miles and miles and not have a bleed. And you know, I've had some instances where I've fallen and would have ended up with a massive bleed and have had absolutely nothing. So for me, this has been a life-changing product to be able to go on. I consider myself extremely lucky because I was enrolled in the clinical trial and got access to this earlier. You know, you will hear from, you know, a parent shortly that has a 7-year-old son, which, you know, clearly will come out the same types of advantages and benefits that I've seen. So, you know, it's really important, and this is why from a blood safety supply committee, you know, we've been fighting really hard to make this available and have been having many conversations to try and sort this out. And so I'm very optimistic and hopeful that we can get this fully funded for all individuals with severe hemophilia and make it available to everybody for a choice to choose if they want to use it. There's no doubt there are guys that are completely fine with the products they're using, but there are many that aren't. And so, you know, hopefully with what we're doing as a community, we're able to drive that adoption and drive that decision for funding and make it available. And so that's all. And I'll pass it over back to Boyan and to Dr. Lillicrap to walk you through the science and the clinical benefits.
Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for your presentation. So we'll now be moving on to Dr. Lillicrap's presentation, and I have a short bio here for him. So Dr. Lillicrap works at Queen's University, Kingston, and he's a professor in the Department of Pathology and Molecular Medicine at Queen's. He is the recipient of a Senior Canada Research Chair in Molecular Hemostasis. In 2013, he was elected to the Fellowship of the Royal Society of Canada. He is a past member of the World Federation of Hemophilia's Medical Advisory Board and chair of the WFH's Research Committee. He is past chairman of the International Society on Thrombosis and Hemostasis, Scientific and Standardization Committee, and member of the Council of ISTH. Between 2008 and 2014, he served as an associate editor of Blood and is currently co-editor-in-chief of the Journal of Thrombosis and Hemostasis. Dr. Lillicrap's research interests are centered on molecular aspects of the hemostatic system, with a particular emphasis on the potential of molecular genetics and molecular biology to address questions relating to pathological hemostasis. Thank you so much, Dr. Lillicrap, for giving up your evening and joining us here to present to the membership. Just before I pass it on to you, I'm just gonna to remind the audience, if you're not a panelist, if you could please turn off your video, because it will get in the way of the recording and it may slow down the recording time. And also to make sure to keep yourself on mute. So Susan, do you think you could pass the hosting to Dr. Lillicrap so he could share his screen?
Yes, I just made Dr. Lillicrap a co-host, so he should be able to share.
Great, thank you.
So hopefully you should be able to see my screen. Is that correct? Hello?
Yes, sorry, I didn't
okay,
unmute myself there. Yes, we can see.
No problem. Yeah, great, good. Okay, so good evening, everyone, and thank you, Boyan, for that generous introduction. And I want to thank you for inviting me to talk to you this evening. I'm really happy to be able to do this because this is a very good news story. So Cameron, thank you for the invitation, and I hope this is going to be informative for you. I'm going to speak for about 15 minutes, maybe 15 to 20 minutes, about the science and the clinical implications of this amazing new therapy. So let's start. So this is a very brief history on this slide here. Hopefully you can see my laser pointer. So from about 1960 onwards, we treated hemophilia with various concentrates, cryoprecipitate or plasma-derived concentrates. And then for the past 20 to 30 years, we've been using recombinant factor concentrates. And then for the last decade, we've seen this incredible expansion of innovation with nucleic acid-based therapies, antibody therapies, and modified recombinant concentrates. And we're going to be talking today actually about something to do with antibody-mediated therapy. So the next slide is, so here are the four ways that innovation has entered the hemophilia field. The first thing is about extended half-life products. Some of you on the line, hopefully, presumably are on extended half-life factor 8 or 9. I'm going to be talking to you about this innovation, so-called intrinsic 10As innovation. I'll explain what that means in just a moment. The third form is to inhibit the anticoagulant parts of hemostasis. Some of you have heard this referred to as rebalancing hemostasis, and this is also entering the clinic. And then finally, you're all aware, I'm sure, of the possibility of gene therapy, which also is just beginning to enter the clinics in the last 5 years. So this is the slide that everyone hates to look at, I'm sure, but this is the coagulation cascade. Down the bottom here is fibrin. This is a blood clot. And these are a group of proteins you're familiar with, which go together, interact with one another to produce normal blood coagulation. And hemophilia relates to this complex in the middle of the cascade. And we call this the intrinsic 10As complex because it's making factor 10A, activated factor 10. So you're aware that if you lose factor 9, which is behind this cross here, you have hemophilia B. And if you lose or if you're missing factor 8, you have hemophilia A. You all know this. And much of what I'm going to say this evening relates to the treatment of this disease because Hemlibra doesn't replace factor 9. So Hemlibra, first of all, is a partial replacement therapy, a substitute therapy for factor 8. So the next few slides sort of illustrate the mechanism, and I hope these slides will be illustrative for you. So what I've shown here is what happens in the absence of factor 8, so in hemophilia A, where you have a protein, activated factor 9 in red, 9A, and you have the protein that it's supposed to be working on or cleaving or activating factor 10. That's shown in blue. And these are sitting on a membrane surface. This is supposed to be something like an activated platelet at the bottom of the slide. But you can see on this slide that factor 9A can't get close to factor 10. It won't be able to cleave factor 10 because it can't get close enough to produce that activation. So you get very little activated factor 10 produced. Here's what happens when you introduce factor 8. You can see now that factor 8 brings together the enzyme 9A to the protein it's activating, factor 10, by sort of acting as a scaffold. So you can see it brings together these two proteins and makes this reaction now hugely more efficient, 200,000-fold better than without factor 8 being there. And now you've got lots of factor 10A being produced. And this is the critical thing that's missing when you have hemophilia A. You just can't produce this protein. So now about 20 years ago in Japan, a group called Chugai, a company called Chugai, thought, how could we substitute factor VIII? And they produced this so-called bispecific antibody, which is now referred to as emicizumab or Hemlibra. And you can see what this antibody does. It binds through one of its arms. This is what a structure of an antibody looks like. It looks like a Y-shaped molecule. It binds through one of these arms to factor 9A, and the other arm binds to factor 10. And this is why we call it bispecific. It has two specific binding sites, enzyme and substrate. So this is the way that this is a factor VIII mimetic. It mimics factor VIII activity, and it's bispecific because it binds to two different targets, the red protein and the blue protein, and it makes this happen again. But it doesn't do this as well as factor VIII. This is another important message. So what I've shown here in these numbers are relative efficiency of this complex working. If you have the enzyme alone, only activated factor 9, I've given this a number of 1. If you reconstitute the complex, and I go back a couple of slides here to this, if you have this, you have an efficiency of over 200,000. So this is very, very markedly improved with factor VIII. Hemlibra, this bispecific antibody, produces around about this number. So you can see that this is about 10% of this. And in fact, one of the things that you may want to talk about later is what is the factor VIII equivalence of Hemlibra? This is actually not easy to come by. And in fact, I should caution you that depending upon the method you use, this number can be a little bit different. But we think that once you reach steady state therapeutic levels of Hemlibra, it produces around about 10% of what you'd get with factor VIII. So around about these numbers that I showed you here. So if you want to say, can I give myself enough Hemlibra to get 100% levels? I think the answer simply is you can't do that. There's a ceiling which is somewhere around about 10 to 15%. And that's why prophylactically, this is very good, and it will treat some small bleeds, but it's not something that will likely be effective in a major bleeding problem. So for the next 10 minutes, I'm just going to briefly talk about the 4 studies, Haven 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the next slide shows you what these are about. So Haven 1 was the first study. It was an adolescent study in patients with hemophilia with inhibitors. Haven 2 was a childhood study, less than 12 years of age, again with inhibitors. Haven 3 was an adolescent study, this time without inhibitors. So these are regular patients with hemophilia A over the age of 12 without inhibitors. And then Haven 4 was the study, again, more than 12 years of age, so adolescent, without and with inhibitors, a smaller study. And this is giving Hemlibra every 4 weeks. You can see the doses here were weekly, every 2 weeks and every 4 weeks. Here in this group without inhibitors, weekly and every 2 weeks. And then this last study was the bigger dose every 4 weeks. So everything subcutaneously from once a week to out to in Haven 4 every 4 weeks. So I'm just on the next 4 slides, very briefly going to summarize the initial studies. This was the first study of patients with inhibitors. This was published in the New England Journal, a very, very reputable journal back in 2017. There were 109 patients with inhibitors. They received weekly subcutaneous emicizumab, Hemlibra, And there was an 87% reduction in the bleeding rates, the annual bleeding rates in those patients with emicizumab. And in addition, 63% of those patients on Hemlibra every week by subcutaneous injection had no bleeds during this therapy. So this, in a group of difficult patients, patients with inhibitors, is really an astonishing result. I mean, I think this is, the word transformative is used a lot, and I think it really is illustrated by these results. They really are remarkable. And then in 2018, the study in patients without inhibitors. So these are severe patients, adults and adolescents with no factor VIII, but without inhibitors. And I've summarized those results here. So there were 152 severe patients, more than 12 years of age. They were treated in Group A with weekly injections, in Group B with every 2 weeks subcutaneous delivery, and Group C was a group who did not receive emicizumab prophylaxis. And you can see the annualized bleed rates here in Group A. This is weekly. Group B, every 2 weeks. Very, very low ABRs, annualized bleed rates. And look at the results with the no prophylaxis group, 38. I mean, you don't have to be an amazing statistician to see how incredibly impactful this was for the lives of these individuals. And then at the bottom, you can see the zero bleed rates. Of course, in Group C, who were not getting prophylaxis, that was zero. They all had bleeds. And the zero bleed rates in the other two groups were around about 60%. So lastly, in these last 2 or 3 slides, in December of last year, so just now 3 months ago in Blood, there's the latest results of long-term outcomes with emicizumab prophylaxis in all 4 of these studies. So this is now a combination set of results going out to about 4 years when you combine the 4 studies I just mentioned to you. So here is the results of all of those studies combined, and here are the individual Haven 1, 2, 3, and 4 studies. But maybe for time's sake, let me just focus on all of the studies. The numbers here are the numbers of patients. So the N number, which you can see is close to 400. And this is the duration of the studies going out to 192 weeks. And these are the ABR numbers, the annualized bleed rate numbers, which you can see are below 1. So these ABR numbers are very, very low. Craig has already told you that he's had no bleeds in the last couple of years, I think he said. There is a bit of a range here. So you can see the 95% confidence intervals go up to as high as 5 and down to 0. But overall, the numbers are very, very low. And that's the case for all of these studies. Here's Haven 2, children with inhibitors, ABRs of below 1. Remarkable results. And then lastly, in the same report in Blood 2020, you can see here in the dark blue is 0 bleeds. And then in the light blue, bleeds between 1 and 3 during this period of time. And so you can see here that the vast majority, again, of patients, 80% plus, had 0 bleeds. Large numbers of patients, 300, 200, over an extended period of time, had this remarkable response with 80% of individuals with no bleeds, and then the remaining just with 1 to 3 bleeds per year. Now, what about adverse events? So just finishing up here. The serious adverse events were some thrombotic episodes. They all occurred now several years ago in Haven 1. That was the inhibitor study. There were venous thromboembolic events, so venous thrombosis in actually 2 or 3 patients. And then a couple of patients had these things called thrombotic microangiopathies. We don't really understand why these occurred, but we should say that they all occurred with the coincident delivery of fever, this bypassing agent. And none of these events have occurred since then. So we think this was an incidence of coincident delivery of this bypass agent with repeated Hemlibra. So I think this is my last slide. So now around the world, there's been more than 5,000 patients treated with Hemlibra. Craig has already told you about all the countries that now have licensed this and are using it. I've told you that it produces partial factor VIII mimetic activity, round about 10 to 15%, we think. The reason it doesn't give you full activity is because its contacts with factor IXA and factor 10 are limited. They're not as good as factor VIII. Factor VIII has evolved over millions of years to be as good as it is, and this antibody does very well, but it's not as good as total factor VIII. It doesn't have to be activated. So this antibody is always on, it always will work, and generally that's a good thing. This says that you can increase the amount of activity by giving more of this material, and that's what happened with lots of fever, and that's probably not a great thing to happen. So you don't want to be giving lots of fever with emicizumab. That's now in the package insert. It's a warning not to happen. And then lastly, do you develop antibodies against Hemlibra? So these would be inhibitory antibodies, just like patients develop inhibitors to factor VIII. And the current information on this large group of patients suggests that that happens in a very low percentage of patients, probably less than 1%. So this is not a major problem. And that's my last slide. I'm going to stop sharing my slide, and I'm going to stay around online and happy to answer any questions at the end of the session. So let me just get out of here for a second. I have to do this.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lillicrap. Thank you for making the time to be here again and to give our members the opportunity to see the presentation and to ask questions for the end of the webinar. Just a reminder to everybody that you can submit them through the chat, and we'll be pooling them and presenting them at the very end. So now we're going to move on to a patient testimonial from Arslan Baig. He's the father of a severe hemophilia A son with who's 7 years old and who had inhibitors. And he now, as a result of Hemlibra, is able to have, his life has completely changed. And so I want to give him the opportunity to talk about that.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Arslan, as Boyan mentioned. So do I have access to share screen as well now? I can.
Yes, you can now.
Okay,
Yeah.
Perfect. So just wanted to give you guys a little bit of background about ourselves. So before our son, both me and my wife's family, we didn't have any background on hemophilia. None of our family members had any hemophilia. Our son was the first one in our families to have it. So a month after he was born, he was diagnosed with hemophilia after we got him circumcised. And we live in a small town, about 2 hours and 45 minutes away from the closest hospital, normal hospital, London hospital. So when he got diagnosed, it was a very traumatic experience for us. And I wanted to share a picture so you guys can see what I mean. I don't want to go into details of it, but I'm just going to quickly share a picture. And this is him when he got diagnosed, and he almost bled to death, and to the point where the local hospital, you can see on his right shin over there, or left shin, I mean, there's a little blood vein tube going in. They had to literally take a drill machine and drill into his leg, into his bone, and put blood in there directly to save his life and to get him stabilized and get him to London hospital. So that was our first traumatic experience about hemophilia. And he had to get helicopter in from Orange Helicopter Company came and took him. And we lived about about 3 hours away, and we had to drive there to the hospital and we got there 2:30 in the morning, and all we knew was we were going to pediatrics ICU to get our son because we didn't know what happened. So I'm going to stop sharing. Can you guys see that picture? Okay, I just wanted to make sure you guys could. Sorry, I just have to get back to Zoom now. I don't know if how I can stop sharing. Oh, there we go, stop sharing. Perfect, sorry guys. So yeah, and then after we found out that he has hemophilia, when we got to the hospital, that's the first time we met Dr. Jardine. He's a London doctor over there. He just retired now. And he came and told us the next day that he has hemophilia, and that was the first time. And I was like, what's hemophilia? And then that's when we found out what it was. And we found out there was a lifelong disease, and it's nothing you can cure at that time. And so we had to basically start giving him medication for that and have to take care of him. And we literally wanted to put him in a bubble. And we used to live 3 hours away from the hospital, as I mentioned. And so anytime he had any bleeds in his early life, we had to rush him all the way to the hospital, and it was a 3-hour drive. And initially, when he was in access, that was a big challenge because anytime he moved, he was learning as a baby. So it was like first time he tried to crawl, he had a hand bleed, and his one arm swelled 5 times the size of the other arm. And we were shocked, and we were like, what happened? And then so we raced the hospital, and we got a shot at that time for a factor. And it was a very humbling experience to see what happens and how people have to go through all this. And we used to have to, we literally never would let him go we would always hold him. We would never let him crawl, do anything else, because we were always worried that he will get a bleed. And about 14 months after he was born, we were given a choice to put a port in his chest so we can give him his medication at home. And that was just so because we lived so far away. So this is a little port I wanted to show you guys. This is actually from in his body that they put in his chest. And I'm sure most people know about this. And then they put a little tube, and they put it through it to his neck inside. So we had to poke him on this little thing every day for immune therapy. And at that time, we were using Advait. And when they installed this port, and they told us it's very rare that they get infected when they're installing it. And of course, ours got infected, and we were in the hospital for about 30 days. And that's when my son developed inhibitors were developed at that time from all the medication that he was getting over there in the hospital. And all the inhibitor levels were very high. And with Advait, he was around 80 and above. And so they said, this drug isn't working, so we'll try different drugs. And we tried Coagulation, we tried New Week, we tried Hope, and then we were told the only other option is going with a blood drug, and we didn't want to do that one. And it was a big challenge, and there was each medication itself, and we used to have a 3-month supply of all the medication at home because we lived so far away. And it was insane that it used to take pretty much half my basement just to get all the medication and all the stuff that came with it there. And we couldn't let him off. We wouldn't let him ride a bike. We wouldn't let him do anything. But the first time he went to school, I bought a 3D printer just to make a part for his chest cover for his port, just so nobody will run into it. And we had to make sure they stayed in with the EA and the school. He couldn't go run around, couldn't play with other kids. He had to be very careful. He was always on the couch. Finally, we heard Hemlibra coming, and it got approved in Canada. And we were like, yes, we were so excited about it. So we couldn't wait till we finally got it. And then we heard that it's not available to Canadian and hemophiliacs. And that was a very stressful time. And then at that time, Dr. Jardine, who was an amazing doctor, he retired recently, but he fought for our son a lot and with Roche, and got him on the trials for it. And about 3 years ago, and we got his first shot. Sorry, guys. And after he got his first shot, we were driving home, and he had normal hemophiliacs. They usually see bruises on your knees, on your arms, and those kind of things all the time, being severe hemophiliac. Even with him not doing anything, he used to have bruises all the time. But after we got his first shot of Hemlibra, and we were driving home, we could literally see all the hematomas changing their colors and sort of starting to disappear. And we were so shocked about it. And initially it was we were still very protective of him and all that. But slowly as time went on, he literally became like a normal kid. There was no bleeds, there's nothing. He could run. He rode a bike for the first time. His sister used to skate, her older sister, and he always wanted to do that. And he always wondered if I could go there or I can just take him there or something. But he finally got on ice after Hemlibra and actually skated and didn't get any bleeds. He's been, in summers, he can go in the backyard, do flips, runs around, does crazy stuff, and it's awesome. And last week he was going tobogganing because he had some snow left, and he was coming down the toboggan, and the toboggan got stuck somewhere, and he fell off, landed face first on the hill, and had scratches all over his face, but there was no bleeds, there was nothing, and he walked off, and he just kept playing and didn't tell us anybody till much later. And we came home, and he's like, he has cuts all over his face. And we're like, oh, what are you doing? And he's like, whatever, it's okay. And that's because of Hemlibra. And it's amazing because the port's out and we don't have to poke him. We don't have to hold him down to shove a thick needle in his chest to give him different drugs. It's just honest, just like a flu shot, basically. And I wanted to show you guys for Hemlibra, this is 10 weeks worth of supply of just other stuff besides the medication. Medication is just this part, like if you had 10 bottles, basically, but this is 10 weeks of all the needles and everything that comes in it, and that's it. So it's compared to half my basement, this is all that you have to do, and it's just once a week, and it's literally life-changing. We feel like a normal family. We went from living day to day, just trying to make sure we go past this one day without bleed, and literally nothing else we worried about. And now we have a normal life. We actually went to see my parents after he was born, after 6 years. A year before that, to Calgary, and we traveled, and we weren't worried about him sitting and getting bleeds or going to the hospital there. We went there, he played, he ran around, he went to all the science centers, everything. His grandparents saw him. My sister saw him for the first time after so many years. So it was amazing that we actually got our lives back. So this drug has definitely been life-changing. And I wish that this is available for everybody. So at least you have an option, and if you can pick that if you want this, so you don't have the bleeds. Nobody has to worry about like joint issues or any other issues that are arthritis or anything like that. And it shouldn't. And if you think about the cost wise, if that's what they're concerned about, I would say we were going to the hospital every week. We were driving. It was financially very stressful because all my vacation days were gone on taking care of my son, making sure he was going to hospital, getting his shots, or even at home, we were dealing with it. I literally had to take unpaid time from my work just so I can take care of him. We had to drive, we have to eat out, or stay at hotels and all that, just so I can take care of our son, just local areas, just traveling, making sure. But with Hemlibra, we actually can have normal things. We can do normal things. We can actually go vacation. We can do other things. And it's financially that has changed too for all of us. And even the burden for the hospital has changed because now they don't have to worry about for the visits. Like we are going to have a visit with his doctor now after about 8 months, and it's going to be a video thing because they're not concerned at all. And he's normal. So we just want to talk for a couple of minutes and say, so at least he doesn't forget who his doctor and his team is still. So it's amazing that how the life changing it is. And I really wish that Canadian Blood Services sees it as how it's changing people's lives rather than just money itself, because I think that is more important. So you can have your full life, you can be normal and not imagine that you will be there someday. And people who don't have this should also help, because we shouldn't take it as granted that, it is what it is and we have normal life. There's so many people struggling so much and we should support them. So that's all I wanted to talk to you guys about. I know there's limited time and I don't want to run over everything. So that's all I got. Thank you.
So much for that, Arslan. That's a very, very powerful story. And I'm so glad that your son was able to get this medication and that his condition has improved as much as it has. I'm very glad to hear that.
Thank you.
So it's going to be hard to follow up, but our next presenter is going to be Cameron Peters, president of Hemophilia Ontario. And he's going to speak to you briefly about what Hemophilia Ontario is planning to do to follow up on the Hemlibra campaign. And Cam has been president of Hemophilia Ontario since 2018. He's responsible currently for Hemophilia Ontario's advocacy efforts, as well as being a longtime volunteer and board member prior to 2018. I'm now going to share my screen and his presentation.
Boyan, did you want to remind folks about questions as well?
Yep, I can do that. Just a reminder that you can place your questions in the chat and direct them to moderator Hemophilia Ontario. They'll be pooled and we'll be answering them all at the end. Thanks, Cam.
Okay, thanks, Boyan, for that. And before, hi everyone, good evening. Thanks for joining us today. I see we've got people from across the country, and I think I saw someone from across the Atlantic. So it's really exciting to have you all here with us. Before I get into my talk, I just want to take a moment. I think he's just left us, but I'll thank him anyway. I wanted to thank Craig and David on behalf of Hemophilia Ontario for their time, their excellent presentations. And for those two gentlemen in particular, Craig and David, you're literally decades of work trying to advance the cause for us. And I just wanted to say thank you. And also to Arslan as well for that story. That was amazing. It's hard to, for someone who doesn't have inhibitors, it's hard to imagine that life could be like that now. And I'm so glad that things are going better. So thank you, Arslan. Everyone, I just want to take a few minutes just to introduce myself and what we're doing here in Ontario. As Boyan said, my name is Cam Peters. I'm the president of the board. Now, my day job is I'm a lawyer for the Ontario government in the area of criminal law. I'm a criminal prosecutor. I'm also a severe factor VIII who had my ankle replaced about 1.5 years ago, and also had hepatitis C for almost 3 decades. And I've cleared that successfully. So in terms of Hemophilia Ontario, I just want to, or sorry, in terms of where we're going to go from here, I just want to come back to why this issue is important in our opinion. Boyan, can you move the slide forward? Oh, there we go. So it seems to me, and I'm not a doctor, I mean, David Lillicrap, I think, just told you that, and Arslan told you as well, Hemophilia Ontario was shown amazing, transformative was the word that David used, talking about this product. And we certainly believe that's the case. And we want to try to make sure that we bring home those changes for people that need that help. It's really important that we continue to advocate for access to more effective and safer medication. And it doesn't necessarily matter whether you think you want to take it or not. And I want to make that really clear. As I said, I'm severe. So if we're successful, I might be eligible, but I'll tell you, I'm not even sure I'm going to take it. But really, I want you all to know that's not the point. That's not why we're fighting this fight right now. It's because we want to make sure that it's available for everyone so they have the choice to take it. And hopefully later on down the line, we can make it available for non-severes and other people that need it. As Arslan said, it's about, as he's already benefited, even Arslan already realized that it's important to make sure that you keep fighting to get this medication out, even if you already got it. So I would ask everyone to keep that in mind. If maybe you decide maybe it's not for me, or you're sitting there thinking I'm a mild and I won't have access, so what does this matter to me? I want you to know that it's important that we keep fighting the fight. And I'm going to tell you in a minute, this isn't the first time that all of us have gone to bat on Hemlibra, and it won't be the last time that we go to fight for better care. We also need to show our provincial health ministry in this province, and in the province you're in as well, you need to show them that we're organized, that we're united, and then we're going to keep pushing until we get what we want. And also, in our opinion, Hemlibra sounds great. We think it's something that everyone needs to have, but you all have to remember that the fight for better care is not going to stop. It's always going to be a cost issue with these new treatments. And things like gene therapy are going to be incredibly expensive. So having to take up our cause to help ourselves and help out each other, it's not going to stop here. So that's, in our opinion, that's why it's really important. Ultimately, as Craig said, it's approved. The issue is not safety. It's not the issue at all. The issue is access and equity. It's whether the government ultimately is going to pay for it. And when you sit in a country as rich as Canada's, for all of us who have these issues, it's just frankly not acceptable that we can't have access to it for the people, especially that need it. In our mind, it's just completely not acceptable. So for us, this is why it's important. So Boyan, do you want to move to the next slide? Please. Oh, great. Can you go to, sorry, what has happened so far? There we go. So Craig already told you quite a bit about this. First of all, This isn't the first time that there's been a lot of work done on Hemlibra. Just it wasn't that long ago that there was an advocacy campaign to get Hemlibra access for inhibitor patients, of which Ontario, we wrote a lot of letters and we had success there. And Craig showed you all the steps and other things they've done specifically on Hemlibra, but also on other things that they do. And as Craig said, there's been over 5,000 letters written already, and there's been about 1,000 letters already written in Ontario. So this whole campaign, it's not going to, it's not new. It's been going on for a while to get better access to Hemlibra and better access to drugs in general. And this is really not the end. This is just another step. This particular campaign we're engaging in right now. We think it's important for everyone to keep building momentum so that we get where we want to be in the end, which is access to better care and hopefully a world free bleeding disorders. So, boy, let's move on. I really want to get to what we're going to do next. Thanks. So up till now, this has largely been led by Canadian Hemophilia Society, which has been great. They've got medical expertise. They've written letters to the provincial ministers. They've got this letter writing campaign off the ground. But the reality is CHS, which does great work, I mean, they just don't have the ability to take it up at the local level. It's just not possible. So it's up to us here in Ontario and you in other provinces to take up this work with your own provincial health ministries. This is where the funding flows from this. You have to remember that Hemlibra is not part of the regular Canada Blood Services tender process. It's outside of that. So it does fall on the provincial governments to decide whether they want to fund it or not. So this is why it's so important to take your efforts to the provincial level. So we will continue to build on this. The first thing is we will be taking this to the board of directors of Hemophilia Ontario to approve lobbying efforts. And I'll tell you, there's actually the vast majority of the board of directors is on this call this evening. So they're very much interested in this. Beyond that, we will personally ourselves, our board, our staff, be writing, I've already written letters, we're going to be writing more letters to get our numbers up. Beyond that, after we have the approval of the board, we'll be preparing documents from the Ministry of Health that are aimed at the political people there. We have lobbyists who help us behind the scenes with our efforts as well to make sure we're doing this properly. And then in time, we'll be, myself and others will be meeting with Ministry of Health staff, right from the lower levels of people who are directly in product access issues up to the higher levels. As I said, it's really on us now in this province to carry forward the work that's been done and make sure that we do everything we can to get access. Ultimately, Hemophilia Ontario is just about choice. It's about access. We aren't trying to tell anyone to switch. We simply just want to make sure that the people that need care the most, that need these products, get them. As I said, it's just not acceptable that the stuff is safe and it's available but not being paid for. So this is what we're going to do about it. So I just want to conclude my comments. Boyd, if you can go forward one more slide. So you might be thinking, what can we do now? And so the very first thing is, if you have more questions, if you yourself are taking it and you have a positive short story to share, we would like to hear about it. Or if you'd like to join us and help with calls and helping us, you can please contact Boyan. He's our staff person who's responsible for helping us coordinate these efforts. His contact information is on the screen. If you haven't already, please go to the Canadian Hemophilia website and fill out the letter yourself. It's easy to do. It doesn't take 10 seconds. You also, please spread it to your family and friends. And one extra thing I wanted to suggest was, today's very busy. We know people, your friends, family will get an email, will get something on social. You know, they may or may not have the time. Think about it. Everyone has a busy life, and the information flow is overwhelming sometimes. But I'm going to ask everyone to take it upon themselves. Go to your spouses, go to your parents, go to your friends, and get their permission to send the letter on their behalf. So what I mean is, tell them what you're going to do, make sure it's okay, and then you yourself go and fill out the letter yourself on their behalf. You know, you can easily gather 5 or 10 letters yourself, which makes a huge difference just by doing that. If you care about this, if you want to help yourself and help others, that's a really good way to help. The more letters we send, the better. We're not going to lose anything by having more letters. You might think that, well, we're a small group. You know, how are we going to make a difference? We're just a few hundred or a few thousand people. You have to understand that the amount of money that governments spend on us is in the tens, maybe is potentially over $100 million in this province alone. So they listen, they understand dollars and cents. And if people speak, we think it's going to make a big difference. And as Craig said, contact your local member of parliament, contact the Minister of the Health and tell them how you feel. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. And I'm sure a phone call is probably as good as 100 letters. So those are some of the things you can do. And I would encourage you, as I said, to please do them, even if you're mild or you think maybe it's not for you. Like Arslan said, make sure that you do everything you can to help the people that need it. There are a lot of people who are older, who have other issues, even accessing veins. They're going to benefit from this. So we feel that it's on us to try to push this ball forward. So I ask you to do the same. And finally, stay tuned. Hopefully we'll have some good news. Hopefully we'll get where we want to be on this, and we'll keep going. So those are all my comments, Boyan. I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks so much for that, Cam. I think that's a good place to go with like a call for action before we jump onto our question period, which we can get started with right now. So just as another reminder, please throw questions down into the chat. At this point, if you don't want to direct them to the moderator and you want to just chat to everyone and it's easier for you, please put them there and I'll be able to look at them as we go, and I'll be able to put them to the panelists. So I'll start and direct questions as appropriate based on what I'm reading here and take it from there. So our first question here is for Dr. Lillicrap and it's an important one: how safe is Hemlibra?
Well, it's very safe. I mean, that's the simple answer. At the very end of my presentation, I commented upon these very few thrombosis episodes that occurred in Haven 1 now 4 years or so ago. And we kind of understand how they occurred. They were in inhibitor patients getting fever as well. And so since then, there's been wide-scale surveillance done of patients on Hemlibra, and there have been no additional responses like that. So I think the concern about thrombosis, I mean, we're still watching, but I think it hasn't happened for a long time now. And so I think that's something that I need to tell people, but I don't think it's a major problem now. It certainly isn't a problem. And aside from that, there are some crazy things. Some people, I see skin rashes. Some people just get very strange reactions, which they're very rare. And I can't even tell you what the percentage is, but it's a very rare thing that you might get with any drug, to be honest with you. So I think the simple answer to the question is we believe this is a very safe drug. And it works in a very brilliant, transformative way.
Great, thank you for that. We have like a follow-up here right in the chat I think this is asking about the episodes with Hemlibra that resulted in negative effects, which is in layman's terms, what are those episodes? And I think the reference to episodes is probably the deaths.
Well, there was one patient who died from a bleed that was not responding well to anything, I think. So to my knowledge, that was the one that potentially could be aimed at Hemlibra as not being enough to stop the bleeding from someone bleeding from their gut. There have been patients who've died on Hemlibra, but to my knowledge, the connection with Hemlibra has not been substantiated in any way. So, I mean, if you follow enough people, and some of these people are middle-aged or older, some of those people will die. But the connection with Hemlibra, to my knowledge, has not been proven. So I think that's the simplest thing I can say to you. Those few events, as I say, all occurred with coincident fever, and they were blood clots that occurred in the leg or in other places. Actually, a couple of them I think were even under the skin. They were unusual. So I think if you're on Hemlibra and something unusual happens, you should get medical advice. But I think that those events are very unusual.
Thank you so much. I think it's really important to people to hear that kind of thing, just to have reassurances and to have it placed in context. The next question, also in a similar vein, is thank you for bringing our attention that Hemlibra gives you the same levels as a person with mild hemophilia and is not a cure for hemophilia. Can you describe in what circumstances you would need to use factor VIII, so clotting factor concentrates?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I think, well, when I gave you the presentation, I talked about this equivalence level of about 10 to 15%. And I mean, again, I'd say that is a little controversial, but what is not controversial is that you can't achieve 100% factor VIII levels. So I think in certain circumstances, such as major surgery, you likely will have to give factor VIII, or you almost certainly will need to give factor VIII. There have been minor surgeries carried out on Hemlibra. I think I remember hearing about an appendectomy, and there are probably other minor surgeries. But a major surgery will require factor VIII. And if someone's got a significant bleed, they need to contact their local center and ask, do I need to give factor VIII as well? And as soon as you give factor VIII, actually, it doesn't add on to Hemlibra, it actually displaces Hemlibra. I talked about these contact points. And so as soon as you give factor VIII, the Hemlibra becomes actually irrelevant while you've got factor VIII in the circulation. So I think major surgery, major bleeding, but if in doubt, contact your hemophilia treatment center.
Okay, wonderful. Somebody is asking as well, as emicizumab, Hemlibra, from the family of biologics? And if yes, do we expect to see some side effects of TNF-alpha inhibitors such as infliximab or Humira, or SEs such as interleukin inhibitors?
Okay, I'm going to try to, I'm not sure that I know enough to answer that question, but these are antibodies as well, which are, so with those agents, there has been incidences, I think, of anti-drug antibodies. So developing antibodies, just as hemophiliacs sometimes do, to factor VIII. So neutralizing antibodies to some of those other agents, I think, have been reported. And at the very end of my talk, I told you that so far, the number of anti-drug antibodies to Hemlibra has been very small. The latest numbers I saw were, I think, 0.8%. So there is an incidence, but it's extremely low. And I'm not aware, and I'm pretty sure there will be no interaction between Hemlibra and the other biologicals that you mentioned.
Thank you. Now, these are coming fast and hard here. I didn't understand how at 10% effectiveness as factor VIII, it is considered better. Somebody mentioned.
So, I mean, it's basically mimicking what you'd see with mild hemophilia. Some of the people on the call this evening may have non-severe disease, maybe 10, 15%. And in most cases, spontaneous bleeds at least are not there. If you have a target joint, of course, there can be bleeding. So, I mean, it is important to remember this is not, it's not providing 100% levels. It's providing very, very good prophylactic preventative therapy. Again, this word transformative is not used lightly. It produces a major difference, but it's not 100% factor VIII equivalent. It's like having mild hemophilia with a level of 10, 15, possibly 20%. And so you've got to be careful. You heard Arslan describe his son going out in the back garden and doing crazy stuff, tobogganing. That's okay. But, if you're concerned, you've still got to be a little cautious.
And can I speak to the 10% issue, just from a practical perspective? So I'm a severe, right? So I'm walking around without treatment at less than 1%. So certainly for me, I mean, in terms of my activity level, I'm pretty active. to keep that level up, it's treating every other day, which a lot of you know about prophylaxis. When you get those downtimes, you hit those periods where you're in a risk zone. So the basic idea of walking around at 10% with a subcutaneous injection potentially once a week is, at least in my mind, practical perspective, would be kind of a big deal.
Yeah, so the place where I practice, we've got a couple of patients, non-inhibitor patients, who are on this agent. And the adult patient, there's one adult, one child. The adult patient was a challenging person had real problems. And now, about 18 months on, again, uses the transformative word. It's life-changing. He's on every 2 weeks, so subcutaneous injection once every 2 weeks, and he's able to do stuff that he wouldn't have thought about before.
Thank you. So we know that the 10% equivalence is just a way of thinking about it for a group that has been on factor replacement therapy, where we think of it in terms of levels. So, for example, how would there be any benefit, for example, to mild and moderate hemophiliacs being on Hemlibra?
I don't know the answer to the question. It's possible. Certainly in patients who are moderately severe, with levels less than 5%, I think that the Hemlibra would be beneficial. But I think once you start getting around 10, 15+%, I'm not sure you're not going to get an additive effect. That's for sure. So I think that in some non-severe cases who are having clinical problems, Hemlibra might be an option. But I think once you reach 10% and above, it's not easy to see exactly how Hemlibra would help.
Okay, now we have another question here. Does Hemlibra increase the pre-existing titer of factor VIII antibody level, or has no effect on that titer?
No effect. It's not seen by those antibodies at all. That's why it's such a brilliant treatment for patients with inhibitors. Again, I think we can only have dreamed that something like this would come along. It's not seen by those antibodies in any way.
Great. Question here, if factor VIII produces more folds than Hemlibra, with Hemlibra being at approximately 10% efficacy, how is it, we had like two submitted twice here. Are there any cost-saving effects from countries who've had the benefit of using this treatment? Somebody comments, it's really all the government cares about.
Yeah, I don't know the costing well enough, I'm afraid. What I can tell you is that, just to go back to your advocacy, as a treater who has lots of connections with people in other countries, it's just unbelievably embarrassing, to be honest with you. Now the US have been using this agent for 4 years, 3 or 4 years. They're astonished that we are not using this. We are in a very limited number of people without inhibitors and with inhibitor patients, but it's actually pretty much I'd say it's outrageous, really, that we don't have access. It's almost as though we're an nth grade country in terms of healthcare. So I vehemently support your advocacy, because everyone else around the world, certainly in developed countries, have now got extensive use of this in this population.
Boyan, could I ask a question?
Of course.
And for David and maybe Craig, I'm just wondering if you've seen or become aware of situations where, even for those that don't have inhibitors, where with the subcutaneous injection, it's made a difference. I understand there's some people that do have major issues accessing veins. I'm thinking as well, our group is aging, which is great, but that's going to present some other issues in terms of lining up veins, I'm thinking, as people age. Have you seen any experience, or do you have any thoughts on how the subcutaneous route could help people outside of the inhibitor group?
Go ahead, Craig.
My video is lost, so somebody's locked me out. Oh, there we go. I guess I'm kicking back in, Moyen. Yeah, so, we've had lots of conversations about this, and I think Dr. Lillicrap will sort of even contest to this, is that, a huge topic at the global level has been about aging guys with bleeding disorders. We're all living now longer than we ever have, and there's guys that are in their 70s and 80s, and I think that where we're going to see this having a real impact in individuals is when they become to the point that they're in long-term care facilities, which don't have the time and the ability for nurses to be doing injections, and subcutaneous becomes a real simple route for treatment and care of those guys in those facilities. So I think from an aged perspective, there's no doubt there's going to be impacts, like there are going to be impacts from a child perspective where we're not having to put ports in individuals. So the two extremes of the spectrum. So I think that's a big component, I do think. Dr. Lillicrap?
Yeah, I mean, there are some obvious populations I think that would benefit. I mean, the subcutaneous injections obviously are just so much easier. And if you can do this every 2 weeks, and even the Haven 4 study every 4 weeks, the results were pretty good. The ABRs were, I think, below 4, maybe even below 3. So they were very good results once a month. So I think, the time saved, the volume, I think every 4 weeks is a little bit more. So, but anyway, it's I don't think there's any doubt that this lack of repeated, I mean, for factor 8, most people, even on extended half-life agents, are having to give factor 8 at least twice a week, I would guess. Yeah.
I would say, we've talked about this, and I think it fundamentally comes down to, choice. And this is where we've talked about for years of individuals having choice. And there are no doubt that there are individuals that use factor 8 that have, high levels. They moderate themselves based on various activities at treating days that they do that, have great vascular access, and there may never be a need for them in the short term to be making that change. And so the key for me has always been making the choice available for each individual and for our physicians to be able to prescribe it to us based on each individual's circumstance that requires. So, that's where, I'm currently sitting on the RFP process for CBS, and that's where we keep pushing. It's about choice, and there should be, we're starting to see that everybody responds differently to each product, even though you say it's homogeneous and all factor 8 is a factor 8, but the fact is the PKs are very different from one product to another. And so for us, substantially, having a choice and having those products, all of them available for our physicians to be using based on our biological response to those products is really important.
Answer. Craig, I wanted to actually ask you as well since there were some questions about cost, to speak to our previous efforts as an organization and what that looks like for the system and what that looks like for us, and where the challenges have been with advocacy because of that, because I think people are curious.
Yeah, we've struggled with this over the last, I would say 8 years of successive RFPs that have happened. There's been significant savings by the provincial governments and CBS on that part based on these RFP processes, which has given us concern because those drops have been so precipitous that we've always feared the fact that when these innovative drugs start coming available, whether it's extended half-life, which was a battle that we had, Hemlibra, it makes it a big difference in cost, and it makes it hard for us to argue with the governments. And that's why we're saying to everybody, we need your help. We need you to be writing letters. We need to be advocating. We need to be talking about the benefit that this drug has. And if you even just look at the CATALYST study, they look at phase 3 clinical trials and they said there was no demonstrative difference, which is ridiculous. And so we're saying, what you need to be looking at real world data, looking at what this impact has on individuals, and you can't be looking at it just from a publication perspective, what the companies have come up with, small data sets of individuals. So, that's where we're arguing, and that's where we're pushing, and so there is no doubt a difference in cost for Hemlibra currently. We don't know what the negotiations are that are happening. Clearly the companies came in, or Roche came in at an equivalent cost of what inhibitor patients are treating at, which makes sense. But that's the fight we're trying to deal with, is the differential in cost. And hopefully, Roche is starting to realize, they're hearing it from around the world. Mark Skinner, the past president of World Federation of Hemophilia at a Congress 8 years ago, threw it out to the company saying, you need to be reevaluating how you're pricing. So hopefully they're hearing, hopefully they listen, and hopefully they're able to get approvals, and we're able to start getting access to the product.
Thanks, Craig. I'm just going to ask you very quickly to expand on RFP for the sake of the audience. This is an area we know well and we deal with, just to give everybody an idea of how procurement works in Canada.
Sure. So Canadian Blood Services, other blood agencies around the world, or even within the health systems, I deal with RFPs from a work perspective for things that are being ordered from hospitals. So an RFP is a request for proposal. So basically it's a procurement process that has very defined parameters. They put a document out to the companies to respond to with very specific questions, with very specific expectations of what those answers are, that then individuals that are part of the review process would score, and then a decision is made from that process of who wins the award and whose product they bring in.
Great, thanks for that, Craig. Going to jump back onto the scientific side. We're getting a flood of questions now. This one's very specific, so Dr. Lillicrap, so I'm just going to read it out exactly as is. How is Hemlibra better than factor 7 replacement when factor 7 produces more folds than Hemlibra? Does it stay longer in the bloodstream?
Yes, so I'm going to give you some answers which are sort of short so we can get through things a bit. So Hemlibra, once it reaches its therapeutic plateau, sticks around so that you can give Hemlibra once every 2 weeks or even out to once a month. So it has antibodies, and Hemlibra is an antibody, have a half-life of about 25 days. So that is massively different to activated factor 7, which has a half-life of 2 hours in the bloodstream. So 2 hours versus 25 days. That's one of the major differences.
Great, thank you.
Boyan, I noticed a question about dental procedures.
Yeah, I was actually just going to jump on that one.
Yeah, so, I just was at the dentist last week and I did not bleed through my procedure.
Right. So I think a small
no need for 7A.
Yeah, so someone with an inhibitor on Hemlibra doesn't need anything else for a dental procedure. I mean, that tells you alone how amazing things are.
Yes, and the question here, the follow-up on the dental, the additional question on the context there is, should I give extra Hemlibra dose when going for dental procedures, or the weekly injection will take care of it?
No, you don't need extra. No, it sticks around. No, don't go doing that. That's actually not scientifically sound, and no.
I think that's an important point to reiterate, though, to let them know, because we're so used to topping up when we need it as people with bleeding disorder. I think that's a really hard habit to break. So I think if you could speak a little more on that, just to let
I'll just make my own comment. It's a bit unnerving, quite frankly, to go on this product, and I'll just use the example. Is we were moving and I was carrying a box of stuff and not paying attention to the stair, and I stepped down and came down 2 stairs and jammed my knee and hit my elbow and hit my hip on the ground, and all it ended up was a bruise on my hip. But it's like, do I treat? Don't I treat? What do I do? And it's very unnerving to just sit and trust that the stuff's going to work. And so yeah, you're once a week, you're covered unless there's something significant and traumatic that happens. but it's a bit unnerving from that perspective. But I've never experienced like the rest of the guys that have been just with regular factor VIII and treating 2 or 3 times a week and having that coverage. So it's a different, unique feeling. It really is.
Yeah, I mean, the blood level of Hemlibra is completely stable, with these once a week, once every 2 week injections. And so you don't need to worry. If you've had a significant accident, or if you've got significant bleeding, you may need some factor VIII, but you do not need repeated Hemlibra injections. No.
Thank you. Thank you for reiterating that. I'm just going to ask the panel, because we're quickly running out of time, would you be able to stay for an extra 10 minutes to cover some extra questions? I totally understand if it's not possible.
Sure.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. So we have here.
Can I ask a question, Boyan?
Of course you can, yeah.
This is just, I'm a pretty active person. So I do mountain biking and I like to pre-treat. So my question is, David mentioned that if you do have to treat, it displaces the Hemlibra. So let's say you were doing that, you had something where you had to treat, say it was an injury, you said it displaced the Hemlibra. What happens after that? Do you stay with your regular medication? Do you treat the Hemlibra right away? Do you just continue weekly? What happens after you've displaced the Hemlibra? How do you get back on it?
So if you want to boost your factor VIII up to, let's say 50%, because you're doing something that's sort of extra, like you're going to do some crazy biking. So maybe in that case, you could treat yourself with a dose of factor VIII that you would calculate to put you up to 50%. You do your activity. The factor VIII goes away with its normal half-life of somewhere around about 12 to 20 hours maximum. And then when it goes away, you've just got your baseline Hemlibra coverage. So you go back to your 10%. I mean, nothing you do with giving factor VIII does anything to the Hemlibra, except when then factor VIII's there, it says, excuse me, this is my complex, not yours. And it pushes Hemlibra away. But as soon as the factor VIII goes away, Hemlibra just goes back and does what it does, 10, 15% levels.
So another question. So once a week SC injection is great for prophylaxis, but when a bleed happens, shall we add the regular pattern of injection, recombinant factor VIII, in parentheses, niastase?
Yeah, if you've had a bleed, and I think as Craig said, that the introduction of Hemlibra, I think is actually quite uncomfortable for some patients, because they keep thinking, oh my God, I've got to be treating myself here. But actually, I mean, you've heard what Craig said. He can say it again, that you usually will not need these pains and things, maybe some arthritic issues, there may not be new bleeds. But if you've had a bleed, then you should treat yourself the way you would have before, with 1, 2, 3 treatments. And again, if you're needing more than that, you must speak to your hemophilia treatment center. But that would be unusual, actually. Craig, I don't know what you think about this sort of, getting used to being on this fail-safe therapy takes a bit of, getting used to it.
It does, well, particularly from an inhibitor perspective, right? For guys that are factor VIII that may be severe, that are treating, that are having that coverage, it may not be the same, but just the mere fact of going once a week and going, okay, I'm covered, and it's like I said, you sit back and you go, am I bleeding? Am I going to bleed? Am I bleeding? Should I be treating? And, for my experience at this point in time, it's like, okay, it hurts. I get it. Right. But, that was said to me, if I fell down the stairs from my partner, I would be having a sore spot from falling too. So you just sort of, like I said, we all know when we're really bleeding. And I'm sure that if there comes a day that I do something and I end up with a bleed, I'm going to know that it's really bleeding and that Hemlibra is not covering me. So at which point in time, then I'm going to start to treat. But it takes some getting used to. There's no doubt about it. Once a week is, I'm treating in less than a minute.
Just the one other quick comment, Boyan, it's for the inhibitor patients, as Craig will tell you, and I've stressed this thing about with fever. I mean, we now are saying that you really should use 7A. That's definitely the predominant choice. If the 7A isn't working, again, you should get in touch with your hemophilia treatment centers, because a small amount of fever could be used, but that's going to needs to get guidance from your hemophilia treatment center.
Well, in my understanding, Dr. Lillicrap, is that the majority of the centers for those guys that are on Hemlibra are only getting a dose of 7A to have around as coverage anyways, and no one is being prescribed FEBA for home any longer due to the risks associated. Is
Right.
that what all your peers are doing?
Yeah. I just noted in chat that one of our nurse coordinators in Kingston. So and Lisa's right that the messages about head injuries is also, don't forget that. I mean, don't mess around. If in doubt with something around your head, get seen. So don't assume that Hemlibra is helping you there. So I mean, some of the things you've learned over time, you mustn't forget, and that's probably the best message of all. Anything to do with your brain, preserve it for God's sake.
Great.
Boyan, can I ask another question? Is there time?
Yeah, let me just ask one that was submitted here, and then I'll throw it over to you. Is anyone aware of somebody who has gone over to Hemlibra therapy, then reverted back to factor VIII because of dissatisfaction in some way? No.
They had a study. I mean, Roche ran a study, I think, of choice, I think, and I think it was overwhelmingly positive. I think, yeah, the take up of this agent, I think, has been unanimous. Okay.
Cam, you said you had a question?
Yeah, there's a couple things I was thinking, and some folks have asked around two things. First, for David, I apologize if we addressed this. I don't think we did. Someone was asking to compare the effect of gene therapy versus Hemlibra, which I know, of course, gene therapy isn't available for everyone yet. So that was one question. And in answering that as well, David, as well, we know there's a lot of gene therapy trials coming online. A lot of us have access to that. Are you aware of any issues with being on Hemlibra and then entering gene therapy trials?
So certainly being on Hemlibra will not disqualify you from being on a gene therapy trial. I mean, gene therapy, when it kicks in, takes several weeks to start working. So I think probably on a gene therapy trial, being on Hemlibra for the first, let's say, month, 2 or 3 would be quite reasonable. If you compare the two, I mean, they're drastically different, of course, because gene therapy is one shot and that's it. But there are many differences. The variability in response at the moment with gene therapy is pretty profound sometimes. Some people are getting 10% levels, some people are getting 200% levels, and other stuff. And I mean, realistically, I think we're not going to get gene therapy in Canada for at least another 2 or 3 years, at least. I think the first licensed product will probably be either towards the end of this year or in 2022. And I mean, great progress is being made, but for the moment, you've got this agent which is transformative and you should have access to it.
Yeah, thanks. And my other question, this was the issue of cost. I know you've answered it, Boyan asked Craig, but people are really interested in this, Craig. And I'm just wondering if maybe we can, and again, maybe we've all moved just because we talk about it all the time, past it. You mentioned the tender process, but the issue with Hemlibra, of course, is that it doesn't flow through the tender process. It's a provincial government negotiation. So as you mentioned, we don't really know what the cost will be, but, and Craig, I know it might be more of a guess, but can you shed any more light on, say, what the cost difference would be, for example, from a severe factor VIII without inhibitors, on some of the mainline products versus Hemlibra? Like, could you give these folks any idea?
Yeah, so I can't. I have no idea what negotiations may be happening. And so I think it's, to be clear, the negotiation actually, so the way our products are funded, or they are funded from the government, so the provincial ministries fund Canadian Blood Service to procure those supplies on behalf of the governments, and then they make them available to each province treatment centers for care and treatment. So Hemlibra is not in the current RFP process. It is being negotiated, pending approval by the PTs to fund. The current RFP process is taking an allocation off the total volume that will be part of that RFP, knowing that Hemlibra is coming and the potential that that treatment may kick in. So the number of total units that are being put through the RFP process is slightly smaller so that it allows for individuals to come in and it doesn't impact the contracts that are there. But as for price, I can't speculate. I can't tell you. I do know that pricing from current state for us with inhibitors is equivalent to what the treatment costs were for you know, using 7A or using FIBA. And I'm not sure whether that is completely published. If you look at Canadian Blood Services documents, they list out in their annual statement of the total number of dollars spent. But I can't tell you what that pricing is at this point in time.
Thanks.
On that note, we have a number of comments in the chat, but since we're quickly running out of time, I won't be able to get to those. I just want to say to everyone that I have read them. Some of those are amazing comments, and thank you for submitting them. I definitely paid attention to them, but just for the sake of the webinar tonight, I won't be able to get to them. But I will take them in consideration, and we'll definitely be filtering them through and using them to contribute to the way that we develop our thought processes on how we advocate for you. So thank you so much for making those comments anyways. So we'll now move on to finishing up the session for tonight. I just want to say a big thank you to Craig, to Cam, to Dr. David Lillicrap for taking the time and for being here. I'd like to thank Arslan too for presenting the patient perspective. His connection unfortunately timed out, but he said thank you for getting the opportunity to present on it. And I'm sure that I, just like many of you, was very moved by his presentation, and it underscores why this is so important for us to be able to have available to people with bleeding disorders. And yes, thank you to our audience for sticking with us through all of this. Most of you stayed for the full time. Thank you so much again. I hope you all have a great night, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Nice to see you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.